The time of the stop is not the place to argue. That's what court is for. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a video that actually happened a few months ago where there was a delivery driver, a food delivery driver that was tased and it was caught on tape. I mean, there's an argument that goes on between the delivery driver and the police officer. The police officer ends up going to tase him. And the question is, well, why did the officer tase him? Was that right thing for him to do? Or should something else have happened? Let's take a look as we dive into this Tillman take.
Ryan Tillman, real talk, it's the truth.
All right, guys, so let's get into this video. Before we actually get into the incident itself, I really want to talk about something because one of the things that alarms me so much is how we incite race for everything. Now, I'm not saying that race is not a factor. I'm not saying that there's racism that doesn't exist. Racism does exist. Prejudice exists. I'm not disputing any of that stuff. But I want to show you guys how we fuel certain fires because the video we're about to watch, I can't say that this was based on race as the ways this person was treated. One, we don't have that information, but two, we can't always say everything was driven by race. Now, the way the media sometimes will come into play is they will fuel a burning fire and almost make it about race. So what I mean by that, let's watch this news take on this video involving the delivery driver that was tased. Let's take a look.
Investigation is underway right now after a shocking video showing a white Tennessee police officer firing his stun gun at a black food delivery man.
All right, let's pause right there. So this could have went a couple ways. It could have easily been a headline that says, let's watch this video as we watch a delivery driver who was tased by a police officer during a traffic stop. Do you see how that might be a little bit different than let's watch this video as this black delivery driver was tased by this white police officer? Would this video even make headlines if it was a black police officer tasing a white delivery driver? The point of the story is that, you know what, stuff happens and we can't always utilize the race to fuel a narrative. I don't even know if this would have made the headlines if it was the opposite way around. But it did make headlines, and so because it made headlines, let's talk about whether or not the actions of the officer were right or wrong. So let's go ahead and watch the rest of this video.
During a traffic stop. This is alarming video. News Nation correspondent Janelle Fort is live with more on the story. Janelle, the delivery driver, he is facing charges.
Yeah, Kelsey, not only for that speeding ticket, which was a part of the initial stop, but he's also being charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest. And his attorneys, they released this video footage with the hope of clearing their client of these charges.
Get out.
He said he pulled me over for a traffic stop and he's going to tase me.
It's cell phone video. Delane Gordon recorded March 10th while being pulled over by a Tennessee officer.
You will be tased.
Gordon, who's a 28-year-old black man, says he was only a few hundred feet from the destination of the DoorDash order he was delivering in Collegedale, Tennessee, about 20 miles outside of Chattanooga. When the officer drove past him, U-turned, then pulled him over, alleging that he'd been speeding. Gordon's attorneys say when he questioned the officer, was white, about why he was pulled over and requested a supervisor, things got out of hand, so Gordon began recording.
Please stop.
Get out of the car.
Please don't hurt me. Why?
All right, let's pause for a second. So the officer is asking the delivery driver to get out of the car. The question becomes, does the delivery driver, does he need to get out of the car? I've told this to people time and time again. If an officer tells you to get out of the vehicle, get out of the vehicle. Listen to him. Like, just listen to what he's saying. The time of the stop is not the time to argue whether or not that officer is right or wrong. That's what court is for. And people don't understand this sometimes. We just watched a video recently that came to us out of Michigan where an officer conducts a traffic stop. The guy gets out of his car right away. Then he tries to flee from the officer. The officer is fighting with him. The guy grabs the officer's taser, and the officer ends up shooting him and killing him. And so let's, come back to this current video that we're watching. Let's just imagine that this thing took a turn for the worse. This guy reaches for the officer's taser or whatever have you, and the officer ends up utilizing deadly force for fear of his life, all because he refused to get out of the car. So my point is that even though, I'm not going to lie, the delivery driver, it seems like he's being passive and, he's not really offering any type of aggression to the officer. other than just not getting out of the car. But there's a few things that we have to consider. One, that officer hasn't searched that vehicle, so he doesn't know what's in that car. He doesn't know if that guy has a gun in his car or not. He doesn't know if he has any other weapons in the car. So that could be a reason of why that officer wants him to get out of the car. The second thing to realize is that the officer is giving him clear commands to step out of the vehicle, meaning that the driver needs to comply with the instructions that are given to him. And when he doesn't do that, that now puts him in violation of the law, because now he's obstructing and resisting arrest. Therefore, that officer has a lawful reason to use force, reasonable force against this person, because he has probable cause to make an arrest. When the guy is not listening to the officer goes and now he's trying to utilize some type of less than lethal force in order to get him to comply with what he's telling him to do. Therefore, he elects to pull out his taser. So some people are wondering whether or not the taser was right or wrong. Well, I can tell you now the taser is a less than lethal option, and therefore that officer elected to use it in order to gain compliance. So let's go ahead and continue to watch the video and see if the officer is in the right or in the wrong.
Get out!
No, sir.
The video, which is roughly 49 seconds long, picks up in the middle of the encounter.
You can't do that, officer, because I called for your
Get
supervisor. I have my
Get
license.
out!
At one point, Gordon puts his hands up, telling the officer he's feeling uncomfortable.
Sir, I feel
Get out.
uncomfortable. Please get your supervisor.
I don't get
So is feeling uncomfortable a reason to not comply with the instructions of the officer? It's not a reason. I'm sorry to tell you guys this, but just because you're feeling uncomfortable is not a reason to not comply with the officer's instructions. It's just not. And so we have to understand that. I'm telling you, I had a buddy of mine on a podcast a long time ago, and he said it himself. He's a civil rights activist, and he said it himself. The time of the stop is not the time to argue. And just because the officer or the delivery driver called for the officer's supervisor doesn't necessarily mean that that officer needs to wait for him to get there before you start to comply. Now, could this have been done different by the officer? It's definitely possibly could have been done differently by the officer. He could have waited for responding officers. He could have called for backup officers. But again, things are different from agency to agency. It just is what it is. Sometimes you have agencies where the officer supervisor may not be but 20 or 30 minutes away. You might have an agency where their backup partner or officer might not be 20 or 30 minutes away. So you got to realize that every agency is different. And so you can't always expect an officer to wait for their partner to arrive on scene before you have to start complying with their instructions. Let's continue.
Don't touch
I said
me.
get out!
The officer then grabs Gordon and begins yanking him from the car. Moments later, he tases him.
I'm telling you that this is not lawful.
Gordon is charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice, plus the speeding ticket.
That's not
As it
lawful.
Now, I've been tased twice before, and it is not a fun experience. So I asked the question, was all that arguing worth being tased? And did the officer have a lawful reason to tase him? Well, technically, yes. Like I said before, the delivery driver was in violation of a traffic violation. Then he was obstructing and resisting arrest when the officer was telling him to exit the vehicle. Therefore, he had probable cause to make an arrest. When you have probable cause to make an arrest, if you're not complying with the instructions that the officers are using or giving towards you, the officer has reason or the right to use reasonable force in order to effect an arrest, overcome resistance, and prevent escape. And therefore, that's what he did. So the officer had a lawful reason to utilize his taser in order to do those things. And so even though the guy wasn't acting aggressively towards the officer, there was a legitimate fear, or could have been a legitimate fear by the officer, because he didn't know what was in the vehicle and he was asking for a reason to step out of that car, and the guy wasn't compliant. Now, this is still an ongoing investigation. I don't know what the results will be. I can only make assumptions, and that's what these are assumptions just based on my training and experience. The police department still has not released a body cam. So there still is a level that we don't know. We don't know the exact reason as to why the officer was wanting him to step out of the vehicle. We don't know those things. So that's things to find out here in the future. But we watch these videos, and this could have ended so much worse if that officer had to utilize deadly force because he felt like he was in fear of his life. I'm thankful it didn't. I'm thankful that the driver can still be around to talk about it. And And I'm thankful that the officer can still be around to talk about it. But how do we learn from this? The way we learn from this is that if you're ever pulled over by a police officer and they give you an instruction or a command to do something, just make sure you follow it. Even if you feel like you're not in the wrong, I guarantee you your odds of survival on a traffic stop go way up if you just listen to the instructions of the officer, as opposed to disobeying all the commands that the officer is giving you, and now you're in a fight with that officer who now might be in fear of his own life. So I hope you guys learned something from this. Make sure you guys share these videos. I mean, I do these because I want to be informative. I want to help you guys understand why officers make the decisions they make, but I also want to make sure that we can call out behavior that does need correcting. So with that being said, guys, thank you guys so much. Please hit the like button. Please hit the subscribe button. Leave me some comments, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks again, and God bless.
Ryan Tillman, real talk, it's the truth.